A glove, found in an open field, 2 miles from a woman's home. That single piece of evidence had investigators, journalists, and an entire nation holding their breath. The DNA results were finally in. After days of waiting, after tens of thousands of leads, after a federal investigation that had stretched across state lines and lit up newsrooms from Tucson to Washington, the answer had arrived. And what that answer revealed didn't close the case. It had cracked it wide open in a direction nobody expected. This is the Nancy Guthrie case, and if you haven't been following it, you need to be. Because what is unfolding in Tucson, Arizona right now is one of the most layered, most forensically complex disappearance investigations in recent memory. Before this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why federal agents are still working around the clock, why a single holster on a surveillance video may be the break everyone has been waiting for, and why the DNA update that was supposed to give answers has instead opened 4 new doors, each one leading somewhere darker and more urgent than the last. But first, stay with us. Because the detail that changes everything doesn't come at the beginning of this story. It comes later. And when it does, you'll understand why investigators refuse to call this a dead end. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. This channel covers true crime with forensic depth and factual accuracy. No speculation, no sensationalism. Just the evidence, the timeline, and the truth as investigators piece it together. Now, let's get into it. Nancy Guthrie, a resident of Tucson, Arizona. A woman living what appeared to be a quiet, ordinary life in the desert Southwest, until the kind of moment that shatters ordinary completely. And the details of her disappearance triggered an immediate and escalating law enforcement response, drawing in not just local authorities, but federal agents from the FBI, whose involvement signals the seriousness with which this case was treated from the very beginning. A reward of $100,000 was put on the table. That number alone tells you something. That number says, someone, somewhere, knows something. And the people searching for Nancy are desperate enough to pay for it. Tucson is a city of nearly 1 million people. Sprawling, sun-baked, shadowed by the Santa Catalina Mountains to the north, and surrounded by miles of open Sonoran desert in every direction. It is a city where a person can disappear, and where a glove, dropped in a field, can go unnoticed for days. Think about that geography for a moment. Think about the scale of it. And then consider the fact that law enforcement, combing through that landscape, actually found it. 2 miles. And that's the distance between where that glove was recovered and Nancy's home. In any investigation, physical evidence recovered at that kind of distance from a scene raises immediate questions. How did it get there? Who carried it? And most critically, does it connect to the person who showed up on Nancy Guthrie's doorstep on camera, in broad daylight, armed? The FBI released surveillance footage of an unidentified individual who appeared at Nancy's residence. The footage is clear enough to raise alarms, clear enough that investigators locked onto specific details we're going to break down in later chapters that are already generating active leads. But in those early hours, when that footage was being reviewed, when detectives were leaning toward glowing screens in darkened offices, cross-referencing databases and mapping timelines, the glove felt like the thread that could unravel everything. I'd imagine being the investigator who gets the call. A glove has been located approximately 2 miles from the Guthrie residence. It bears enough similarity to evidence associated with the case that it needs to be collected, preserved, and tested. The crime scene unit moves in. The glove is bagged. The chain of custody begins. And from that moment, the clock starts ticking. Because in a case this high profile, the public is watching. The family is waiting. And every hour without answers is another hour that the trail gets colder. Ask yourself, if you were the detective assigned to this case, sitting with that evidence bag on the table in front of you, knowing that a woman's location, possibly her life, might hinge on what that lab comes back with, what would you be feeling right now? That pressure is real. It is felt in every law enforcement agency working this case. And it is exactly why, the moment those DNA results landed, and the world stopped to listen, the sheriff stepped up to the microphone. The update was coming. After all that waiting, after the glove was collected, packaged, and sent off for analysis, the results of the DNA test were finally ready to be shared with the public. And here is where the story pivots. The results came back from the lab. The investigators ran the DNA profile obtained from the glove through CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, a federal database containing DNA profiles from over 21 million individuals, including convicted offenders, arrestees, and forensic unknowns. It is one of the most powerful investigative tools in American law enforcement. If your DNA is in that system, for almost any reason, it will be found. The glove hit nothing. No match, no candidate, no name attached to that DNA profile anywhere in the database. For an investigation that had been building toward this moment, that was a significant setback. The kind of setback that sends investigators back to the whiteboard at midnight, re-examining every assumption, remapping every lead. But here is what the sheriff did not say, and what makes this update far more complicated than a simple no result. The DNA recovered from the glove was not the only unidentified DNA in this investigation. Authorities had previously confirmed that DNA was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. DNA that did not belong to Nancy herself. When the CODIS results came back negative, and the sheriff did not confirm whether the glove DNA matched or failed to match that DNA found inside the residence. He mentioned the Florida lab, he announced the CODIS result, and then silence on that critical comparison. That gap is not small. That gap is the kind of thing that keeps investigators awake and keeps this case from being neatly wrapped up with a single press conference. And there is more. Because the way that glove was tested, and the journey it took before it ever entered the federal database, tells its own story. One that raises serious procedural questions. Questions that the sheriff, standing at that microphone, never addressed. But before we get there is something you need to know about that glove. Something that changes the entire picture of what was tested, what was photographed, and what the public was shown. Because the glove that appeared in those widely circulated photographs, the one captured by a New York Post photographer that many assumed was the centerpiece of this forensic update, that was not the glove that was tested. There is a moment in every missing persons case where the investigation stops being about evidence and starts being about a person. Nancy Guthrie is that person. A resident of Tucson, Arizona, a sun-baked, sprawling desert city flanked by mountain ranges, at home to nearly 1 million people. A city that, when one of its own vanishes under circumstances this alarming, does not go quiet. And Tucson has not been quiet. Tips have poured in by the tens of thousands. Media organizations from coast to coast have tracked every development. And sitting at the center of all of it is Nancy, whose name, whose face, whose story has become one of the most watched disappearance investigations in the country right now. What signals the gravity of this case most powerfully is not just the circumstances of her disappearance, it is the response. The FBI does not coordinate multi-state forensic testing for cases they are not treating with the highest urgency. Surveillance footage is not released publicly unless investigators believe the public holds a piece of the puzzle. and a $1 million reward offered by Nancy's own family is not put on the table unless the people who love her are willing to do absolutely anything to bring her home. $1 million. That number is not routine. That number is desperation meeting determination. It is a family saying, "Someone out there knows something, and we will pay everything we have to hear it." Nancy's home in Tucson is the last confirmed location where she was present, and it is where surveillance captured an unidentified individual appearing at her front door. It is where DNA that does not belong to Nancy was recovered from inside the residence. Every forensic thread in this investigation leads back to that address, and every active lead radiates outward from it. Ask yourself, what does it feel like to stand in that house, knowing what the evidence shows, and knowing the answer is still out there somewhere? It waits. And so do investigators. Because the next move they are preparing to make, the one the DNA setback just forced them toward, may be more powerful than anything they have tried so far. 2 miles, in the middle of an open field, under the relentless Arizona sun. That is where investigators found it. A glove, sitting in the kind of terrain that swallows evidence whole. Dry, sprawling, unforgiving desert landscape, where the wind moves things and the heat distorts everything. The fact that law enforcement located it at all speaks to the methodical, almost obsessive thoroughness of the search operation radiating outward from Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home. When word broke that a glove had been recovered, the public latched onto it immediately. This was tangible. This was physical. In a case built largely around surveillance footage and digital leads, here was something real. Something that could be bagged, labeled, sent to a lab, and answered. The kind of evidence that cracks cases. A New York Post photographer captured an image of a glove connected to the search area. That photograph circulated widely. People studied it, or analysts referenced it. It became, in the public imagination, the centerpiece of the forensic update everyone was waiting for. But here is where the story shifts. That glove, the one in those photographs, was not the glove that was tested. Investigators confirmed that the glove submitted for DNA analysis was a different glove entirely. Recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's residence. A separate item, a separate location, and a detail that the public, watching that photograph circulate across every platform, had no way of knowing. Think about what that means for a moment. The image everyone had in their mind when the DNA results were announced. The glove they pictured in that laboratory, under those fluorescent lights, being swabbed by a technician in latex gloves, was not the right glove. The actual tested glove had been quietly collected, processed, and submitted, while the public's attention was fixed on something else entirely. That is not a small distinction. That is the kind of detail that reminds you how much of a major investigation happens completely out of public view. In fields, in evidence rooms, in conversations between agents that never make it to a press conference. The glove that mattered was real. The DNA on it was real. And the lab results it generated were about to land like a hard stop in the middle of a case that desperately needed forward momentum. The lab results were in. The sheriff stepped to the microphone, and what he said next stopped the investigation's momentum cold. No match. The DNA profile extracted from that glove, collected from an open field 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home, preserved through careful chain of custody, submitted for federal analysis. Returned nothing. Not a partial hit. Not a near candidate. Nothing. The profile was run through CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, a federal database carrying DNA profiles from over 21 million individuals. convicted offenders, arrestees, forensic unknowns accumulated over decades of American law enforcement. If your DNA exists anywhere in that system, CODIS finds it. This time, CODIS found nothing. For an investigation already stretched across state lines, already generating tens of thousands of leads, already carrying the weight of a $1 million family reward, that result landed hard. A setback, real and undeniable. But investigators were careful with their language, and that carefulness is worth paying attention to, because the sheriff, standing at that microphone, said something by omission that is just as significant as what he actually announced. Authorities had previously confirmed that DNA was recovered from inside Nancy's home, DNA that did not belong to Nancy. When the CODIS result was announced, and the sheriff did not confirm whether the glove DNA matched or failed to match that interior DNA. He announced the lab result. He referenced the Florida lab that conducted the testing, and then silence on that critical comparison point. That silence is not nothing. In high-stakes investigations, what is left unsaid at a press conference is often as forensically telling as what is spoken aloud. And then came the procedural detail that raised immediate questions among federal analysts. FBI protocol requires that for DNA evidence to be eligible for CODIS submission, it must be processed by an FBI-approved laboratory located in the state where the item was recovered. The glove was found in Arizona. The sheriff sent it to a lab in Florida. That mismatch meant the glove had to travel back to Arizona for retesting before the results could be formally entered into the federal system. The sheriff's press conference mentioned the Florida lab. Arizona was never mentioned, and that gap has not been explained. But here is what investigators made clear. A CODIS miss is not the end of the forensic road, not even close. Because there is a second method, one that has cracked cases CODIS never could, and it starts with your family tree. Picture a dimly lit room. A forensic analyst seated in front of a monitor, the soft glow of the screen reflecting off their face. On that screen, not a criminal database, not a law enforcement system, a family tree. Now this is where the Nancy Guthrie investigation goes next. When CODIS comes up empty, investigators do not simply fold the evidence away and wait for a new lead to walk through the door. They pivot. And the pivot that law enforcement is now positioned to make in this case is one of the most sophisticated and quietly controversial tools in modern forensic science. It is called investigative genetic genealogy. And it has done what traditional DNA databases could not in some of the most complex cases in recent American criminal history. Here is how it works. The DNA profile recovered from that glove does not need to belong to someone already in a criminal database to be useful. It just needs to share enough genetic markers with someone who voluntarily submitted their DNA to a genealogy testing platform. A relative, a cousin, even a distant connection several branches removed on a family tree. See, investigative genetic genealogy works by identifying partial DNA matches, shared genetic segments that indicate a biological relationship, and then using traditional detective work to map outward from that match, building a family tree until a viable candidate emerges. The method gained national attention after it was used to identify the Golden State Killer in 2018, Joseph James DeAngelo, a case that had gone unsolved for over 4 decades. Investigators uploaded an unknown DNA profile to a genealogy database, found distant relatives, mapped the family tree, and eventually narrowed the field to a single name. That name changed everything. And the same process is now on the table for the Guthrie investigation. But there is a significant obstacle, and it sits at the intersection of forensic science and personal privacy. The two largest consumer genealogy platforms in the United States, 23andMe and Ancestry.com, do not cooperate with law enforcement requests for this type of investigative access. Their privacy policies are explicit, and the millions of profiles sitting in those databases, uploaded voluntarily by people tracing their heritage, searching for relatives, satisfying curiosity, are not available to federal investigators building a criminal case. That leaves smaller, opt-in platforms, databases like GED Match, which allows users to explicitly consent to law enforcement matching. These platforms are smaller. The pool of profiles is more limited, but they have produced results, real results, cases closed, so names identified, and investigators working the Guthrie case are now positioned to move in exactly that direction. Ask yourself, somewhere in a genealogy database right now, there may be a profile uploaded by someone who has no idea their distant DNA connection could lead investigators directly to the answer this case needs. That is not science fiction. That is how this works. The genealogy path is not instant, it is not guaranteed, but it is active. See, and it is the next forensic frontier in the search for answers in the Nancy Guthrie case. What it eventually finds, or doesn't find, will define the next chapter of this investigation entirely. Before the glove, before the DNA, before the genealogy databases and the procedural puzzles, there was a door, and a man standing in front of it. The FBI released surveillance footage capturing an unidentified individual who appeared at Nancy Guthrie's Tucson residence. And the footage was clear enough to be released publicly. Clear enough that federal investigators believed someone watching it might recognize something. A walk, a build, a piece of clothing, a detail so specific it could only mean one thing to one person. That is why you release footage like this. Not because you have exhausted every lead, because the public's eyes are an investigative force multiplier that no agency can replicate alone. And the public looked hard. And most attention landed on the obvious, the individual's physical appearance, their movement, the fact that they were there at all. But federal investigators were not looking at the obvious. They were looking at something smaller, something most people would scroll right past without a second thought. A holster. On the individual's waistband, clearly visible in the footage, sat a firearm, a semi-automatic handgun. But it was not the firearm itself that locked the FBI's attention. See, it was what was holding it. The holster carrying that weapon was not designed for the type of gun it contained. That mismatch, a holster built for one firearm being used to carry another, is the kind of detail that sounds minor until you understand what it tells an investigator. It tells them this item was chosen deliberately, or out of necessity, or from a very specific and limited supply chain. It tells them this holster has a profile, and profiles can be traced. See, think about the forensic mindset required to catch that detail in surveillance footage. While the public was processing the broader image, the presence of an unidentified individual at a missing woman's door, FBI analysts were freeze-framing, zooming, cross-referencing holster models against manufacturer catalogs and retail purchase records. That is not dramatic television procedure. That is the quiet, meticulous, the screen glow work of people who understand that the smallest anomaly in a frame of video can become the thread that unravels an entire case. And this particular thread led somewhere immediate, because that holster, unusual, mismatched, specific, was not impossible to find in the retail landscape. It had been sold, it had been purchased, and somewhere in the Tucson area, the records of who bought it still existed. Ask yourself, would you have noticed the holster? Most people wouldn't, but the FBI did. And what they found when they started pulling that thread is about to give this investigation something it has been lacking since the beginning. A list of names. 40 names. That is what the holster gave them. Working outward from that single mismatched detail visible in the surveillance footage, FBI investigators and Tucson area law enforcement began contacting gun stores across the region. The ask was specific, targeted. The kind of request that only makes sense when you already know exactly what you are looking for. Agents were not walking into stores with a vague description and a hopeful question. They arrived with a profile, a specific, our unusual holster model, and they wanted to know who had purchased it. News Nation first reported that gun stores in the area were provided with a list of approximately 40 individuals who had purchased that particular holster in the Tucson area. 40 people, in a city of nearly 1 million. That is a remarkably narrow field for an investigation of this scale, and it represents exactly the kind of forensic compression that turns a sprawling case into something manageable. But investigators were not stopping at the holster. The surveillance footage showed more than a holster. It showed a specific firearm, a semi-automatic handgun, being carried in that holster. So the next logical step was immediate and precise. Of those 40 people who purchased the holster, how many also purchased the same type of semi-automatic handgun? Because if someone on that list bought both, the holster and the weapon, that convergence does not make them guilty. No, but it absolutely makes them someone the FBI wants to speak with. This is gumshoe detective work at its most methodical. No dramatic breakthrough, no single moment of revelation, just investigators moving quietly through purchase records, cross-referencing names, making calls, knocking on doors, the kind of work that rarely makes headlines, but consistently makes cases. And the list does not stop at weapons. And because the holster and the firearm were not the only identifiable items visible in that footage. There was also a backpack, a jacket, items that carried their own retail trail, their own purchase history waiting to be uncovered. If one name on that list of 40 bought the holster, the handgun, and also purchased a matching backpack and jacket, that is no longer a coincidence. That is a forensic profile. That is the moment an interview becomes something much more significant. The net is tightening, quietly, methodically, one purchase record at a time. The holster was unusual, traceable. It gave investigators 40 names, but the man captured on that surveillance footage outside Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home was not just carrying a mismatched holster. He was wearing something, carrying something. And those items had their own story, their own retail fingerprint pressed into the purchase records of one of the most common retail chains in America. The backpack and jacket visible in the footage were traced to Walmart. Think about what that means logistically for a moment. Walmart is not a specialty store. It is not a boutique retailer where a single unusual purchase stands out against a quiet sales ledger. It is the highest volume retail operation in the country. And in the Tucson area alone, there are 9 Walmart locations, 9 stores, each with their own inventory records, their own surveillance systems, or their own transaction histories running back through every register across every shift. That is the trail investigators are now walking. The process is methodical and unglamorous. It involves pulling purchase data, reviewing store footage, cross-referencing transaction records against the timeline of Nancy's disappearance. It involves investigators sitting in back offices of retail stores, scrolling through receipts, looking for a specific backpack model and a specific jacket purchased by a specific person in a specific window of time. It is painstaking, it is slow, and it is exactly the kind of work that breaks cases. Because here is where this investigation gets forensically compelling. The holster list carries 40 names. If any one of those 40 people also purchased a matching backpack and a matching jacket from a Tucson area Walmart, that is no longer circumstantial. That is a pattern. That is the kind of evidentiary convergence that transforms a person of interest into the centerpiece of an active federal investigation. Investigators described it simply: the perfect storm. One person, one holster, one firearm, one backpack, one jacket, all traceable, all purchased, all waiting in a database somewhere to be connected to a single name. That name has not surfaced yet, but the trail is there, and investigators are following every inch of it. While forensic analysts were cross-referencing holster purchases and Walmart receipts, while DNA profiles sat waiting for genealogy matches, while 9 Tucson Walmarts were being quietly worked through one transaction record at a time, something else was happening. Something that introduced an entirely different dimension to this investigation. A human dimension. Unpredictable, unverifiable, and impossible to ignore. Someone had been making contact. Not with law enforcement. Not with Nancy's family. With a media organization. 4 separate times. 4 emails sent to TMZ, each one carrying the same extraordinary claim: that the sender knows the identity of the individual connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, that they know where Nancy is, and that they are willing to provide that information in exchange for the $1 million reward her family has put on the table. 4 emails, 4 opportunities to simply provide the information and let the process work. And 4 times, this individual stopped short of doing exactly that. The reasons given in those emails point to a specific and stated distrust of federal law enforcement. This person, whoever they are, does not want to go directly to the FBI. They have made that clear repeatedly. And that single detail transforms what could be a straightforward tip into something far more complicated. A negotiation conducted in public, through a media outlet, but with a missing woman's life potentially hanging in the balance. TMZ forwarded every communication to the FBI, every single one, and then made a deliberate and carefully considered editorial decision to stop publicizing the emails entirely. The reasoning is precise and worth understanding. If a media organization continues announcing that another email has arrived, continues confirming that contact is ongoing, that continues reporting that the tipster still has not delivered, that pattern of reporting becomes a signal. It tells anyone paying close attention exactly when the information has finally been handed over. It telegraphs the moment. And in a case where an unidentified individual may be monitoring every media development, that telegraph could prompt an immediate response that puts Nancy at greater risk. So the emails go to the FBI. The public record of that transfer exists. See, and if the tipster is watching, that public record is exactly what protects their claim to the reward when this is over. Then there is the ransom note, separately received by TMZ and now in the hands of the FBI, who are described as keenly and actively focused on its analysis. Handwriting? Language patterns? Specific phrasing? But the forensic examination of written communication is a discipline unto itself. And in a case already generating tens of thousands of leads that investigators are methodically sorting, prioritizing, and pursuing, the ransom note represents one of the most direct potential connections to whoever is responsible for Nancy's disappearance. Tens of thousands of leads. That number is not rhetorical. That is the actual operational reality facing the sheriff's office and federal investigators right now. Each lead requires evaluation. Each one demands a decision. Is this worth deploying personnel? Or does it go in the discard pile? The sheer volume is staggering. And somewhere buried inside that volume, investigators believe, is the lead that matters. The gumshoe work continues, quietly, urgently, around the clock. See, every thread that investigators are pulling in the Nancy Guthrie case right now could be the one that changes everything. That is not dramatic language. That is the operational reality of where this investigation stands today. 4 active forensic and investigative fronts, each one moving simultaneously, each one capable of producing the break that brings this case to resolution. And understanding all 4, understanding how they connect and where they are headed, is the difference between following this story and truly understanding it. The first front is the DNA. The glove recovered 2 miles from Nancy's Tucson home returned no match in CODIS. But the forensic road does not end there. Investigative genetic genealogy is the next step, a method that has identified individuals traditional databases could not touch. The DNA profile from that glove is waiting. The genealogy databases are there. And somewhere in a family tree that has nothing to do with criminal records, a biological connection may exist that leads investigators directly to a name. The second front is the holster. 40 people in the Tucson area purchased that specific unusual holster, visible on the unidentified individual in the surveillance footage, released by the FBI. Investigators are now cross-referencing that list against firearm purchases, against Walmart transaction records, and against the backpack and jacket also visible in that footage. One name appearing across all of those purchase records would not be a coincidence. It would be a forensic profile that demands immediate federal attention. The third front is the Walmart trail. 9 stores, 1 backpack, 1 jacket, transaction records and surveillance footage being quietly worked through by investigators who understand that retail evidence has closed cases that laboratory evidence could not. And the perfect storm that law enforcement described, one individual connected to every traceable item in that footage, is still a possibility. And that possibility is still being actively pursued. The fourth front is human. An anonymous individual has made contact 4 times, claiming knowledge of Nancy's location and the identity of the person connected to her disappearance. Those communications are with the FBI. The ransom note is with the FBI, and tens of thousands of leads are being sorted, evaluated, and acted upon by investigators who have not slowed down and show no signs of doing so. This is what gumshoe detective work looks like in a federal missing persons investigation. It is not a single dramatic breakthrough. It is 40 simultaneous threads being pulled at once by teams of people who understand that any one of them could be the one that holds. Nancy Guthrie's family has put $1 million on the table. That reward remains unclaimed, which means the person who holds the answer to this case has not yet come forward. But the net that investigators are building, forensic, digital, genealogical, retail, is getting harder to step around. If you have any information connected to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, contact the relevant authorities or the tip lines that have been made publicly available. The leads that matter most in cases like this one often come from the most unexpected places. An ordinary person who noticed something small, a detail that seemed insignificant at the time. Those details matter. They always have. And if this coverage has given you a clearer picture of where this investigation stands, if you want to stay informed as every new development breaks in the Nancy Guthrie case, subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, because this story is not over. The DNA is not finished. The list of 40 names is being worked through right now. And the person who sent those 4 emails is still out there, still holding information that could change everything. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. And this investigation, as complex and layered as it has become, is still moving forward with everything it has. The clock is still running.